Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Clark's. I'm Javian,
I'm Tyler.
and today we have a special guest with us. This is part two of our two-part series on performance anxiety and mental health. So I want to take the time to thank you and welcome Miss Meagan Brown. Welcome, Miss Meagan Brown. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So we're gonna, be asking Meagan different questions about performance anxiety and mental health. She is a therapist for the University of Florida Hospital in Gainesville. But I'm gonna let her, give you her whole spiel. But before we jump into our topics, Miss Meagan, are you drinking any coffee today?
I'm not.
Oh no. Well, Tyler and I will drink some for you. But are you into coffee, or are you more of like a tea person, or you are like anti-caffeine? Like, what's your
I
deal?
actually have a caffeine sensitivity, so I cannot have coffee. But I do love tea as long as it doesn't have caffeine. Like I can drink pretty much any tea that you can name, and I like it.
I feel for you. I don't know if I could survive without caffeine.
I know,
I
right?
know.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, what are you drinking today, or are you drinking coffee today?
I am, yeah. So I actually picked up a bag again before this episode, and it's from Papua New Guinea, which I've never had coffee from that region before. So, this is my first try of that. Usually I go for like Ethiopia or Guatemala. So this is a new experience for me. And it's pretty good so far. It's like a medium roast, medium body type of style, chocolatey caramel and a little bit of fruit in the flavor notes. So what about you, man?
So if you guys follow our social media, I on Instagram I posted that I brought some new beans last weekend in Jacksonville at Bo Bean. I actually have the bag right here. So I got this bag. It's a Guatemalan. It's a medium roast. So I've had it maybe about 3 cups since I brought the bag, and I love it. I got it recommended by one of the baristas that was working. He said it was his favorite. So I was all right, let me try it out. So far it's been great. Like I said, it's nice, not too acidic, nice, medium blend. But it's been great. I did a French press. I forgot to get a new pour over.
I'll
It's
just
still
buy
on my
you one.
list. Yeah, buy me one
Yeah, I'll just buy you one.
and send it to me. I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll send it to your school address. That way you can do pour overs in your studio.
Exactly. My students have been asking me to make them coffee anyway, so I say one of these days when I get everything set up in the office. So because we're gonna be moving to a new building soon, so once that happens, I'll make them some coffee, some fresh coffee. So
there you go.
Yeah, so that's our coffee talk for today. So we're here to talk about performance anxiety and mental health. So Meagan, if you don't mind, like, how would you, define what is like performance anxiety and ways to kind of deal with that?
I mean, to keep it simple, it's really just, the fear of failing. It's also it's kind of like unconsciously you're thinking that other people are really, really thinking about you in depths to where you're just like, what if they don't like me? What if they don't like the way that I sound? And really half the time they're not even thinking about that. And then the pressure, of course, that we put on ourselves to be perfectionists, to be great at our crafts. It's natural for us to have that anxiety because we want to do well. And ways that you can deal with any type of anxiety, specifically performance, is you have to be really confident in what you're doing. And while also understanding that there are going to be times where you're probably going to mess up during a performance, and that's okay. When you accept that, that's when you actually do better in the performance, because you're just like, okay, I'm going to play this. I know that there's things that may not go my way, but I'm just going to roll with it. When you roll with things, your anxiety decreases naturally.
Awesome. And I meant to ask you before you said that, but I know, as I said before, you're working at the hospital at University of Florida in Gainesville as a therapist. So like, I know you do a lot of stuff with like mental health, and so how do you kind of get started in that field? Is that something you always wanted to do, or it's just kind of like you stumble upon it one day, or how did that work out?
I actually started off with social work, and because I knew I wanted to help people, but if I'm being honest, being a social worker, they make no money. I was like, I want to do what I love, but I also need to be able to pay my bills. So I was like, why don't I look into the therapy field? And I got really attached to marriage and family therapy because if you just think about it, everything that one person experiences in a family, affects them systemically. So I got really attracted to that, and it just came, the rest just came to me. And I feel like it's such a natural calling that it doesn't even really feel like a job. So, it was a pretty natural walk to that.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
And how long have you been working at the hospital?
I've been there since November of
Okay,
2018.
okay, good. So do you come across, well, I'm assuming you probably do you come across like a lot of patients who are dealing with certain anxieties, or like what type of conversations or experiences have you had with that?
I mean, all the patients that I experience are dual diagnosis, which means that they have substance abuse issues and mental health issues. But when I tell you that like depression, anxiety, that's always like the number one thing that they've experienced since like childhood. And when you don't deal with childhood trauma, of course, it follows you through your adulthood, and then you will do anything to numb the pain, whether that's drugs, sex, overeating, and the list goes on.
Mm,
Hmm.
awesome.
So if you have, or somebody comes to you and they feel like they have anxiety or they feel like they have these addictions, like what ways or like how do you talk them through this? How do you identify those things? Like how do you get them to start being able to kind of resurrect those actions and those thoughts that they have in their mind?
Mm-hmm.
Like what techniques and what ways do you kind of like navigate through that for them? Because that's some pretty heavy
Yeah.
stuff, and I'm sure you have a lot of heavy conversations which can become exhausting. But say if you have somebody like a student right now, maybe that's in college, that is dealing with things or is kind of like suppressing those things, like what advice would you have for them as far as like dealing with this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the way to start it off is I always like to do kind of like a brief assessment for how they were raised, mom and dad in the picture, siblings, different generational things that have carried on. And I like to use a style of therapy specifically. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And what that is it's kind of exposure to whatever that person is experiencing so they can actually face it. Because a lot of my patients haven't been able to move forward because they bury it under something. So when you actually face it, which is extremely uncomfortable, and this takes a couple of sessions for the patient to feel open to explain something so traumatic or just private to them, because I'm a complete stranger at first. So when I use that technique and that approach of therapy, that helps them to slowly move towards the trauma so that we can actually work through it. And any student that was to come to me, and if I could give them any advice, I guess I could say, is it's it sounds really cliche, but it really is a process. I think people come into therapy and they're just like, okay, I'm going to do this in 3 months. Like, don't come in with a timeline, because you could be exposed or realize that you have more trauma than you thought, you have more anxiety than you thought. And I think everyone just needs to give themselves time to work through something and heal and actually learn more about themselves so that they can become more self-aware. When you're more self-aware, you tend to not attach yourself to unhealthy behaviors. Does it make sense?
Oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that notion of like not putting yourself on a timeline. This past week, I was talking to a lot of my students about, getting ready for like their first performances for each other. And, I was talking to one student, and he was like, for his audition, he was like really nervous and anxiety. And, he's like, this is something he like wants to work on and get better at. But so, we were having this long discussion. I'm just like, figuring out how to deal with anxiety is going to be a forever evolving thing. Once you figure it out, something that works for you today may not work for you, 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line, because our values change over time, or our motivations, our whys, like we like to say here on the podcast, knowing your whys, like why you do something, like that's going to change. So like the pressures of your performance might change. So, going into like working on your performance anxiety, I think it's just something like we kind of constantly be, working on. Because I think I might have said this one episode in the past. It's like when I was an undergrad, I didn't really deal with performance anxiety that much. Only maybe a handful of times that I can remember actually being really like shaking. But I think the older I've gotten, the more I feel like I deal with performance anxiety now, because I feel like there's more at stake than, when I was an undergrad. And that's just something like I know about myself, and something I like constantly have to work through. And I guess there's a little bit of that, kind of facing your fear factor that you mentioned earlier. And so like I know a lot of anxiety deals with, like you said, fear, the fear of failure. So like, how should someone like kind of face that fear on a daily, on a daily level, like when they're just working through their stuff?
I think it helps to look at what's making you feel insecure about your craft or about anything surrounding you. When you can work through those insecurities, it also helps with the anxiety, because you can say, well, do I feel insecure about this because of me? Did somebody say something to me? Was this triggered by something? It takes a lot of self-reflection to actually work through anxiety, because people don't just wake up one day and have anxiety. It's triggered by something. So I tell my patients all the time, this is why it's so important to keep like a list or a journal, writing down your behaviors. Even people that have like bipolar disorder, for example, I tell them to keep a calendar and, keep, track of their mood by using different colors. It's the same concept for anxiety. So you can figure out what the source is. When you get to the source, you can actually find the solution.
Oh, that's great. So you talked about journaling
Mm-hmm.
and kind of keeping track of that. Are there any other habits or associations or
Mm-hmm.
things that we can do to kind of, again, get us back on a more positive path?
Yeah, I'm really, really into meditation. That has been like my number one thing for my anxiety or anything that I'm going through. And the thing about meditation, right before your performance, like maybe 30 or 60 seconds before you walk on stage, you can meditate right then and there. It doesn't have to be 5 minutes or an hour. You can think about, okay, how can I reconnect with my center and be confident that I'm going to do well? Anything that doesn't go well, we're going to keep on going. You can easily just stand there and meditate right before you walk on stage.
Awesome. So I'm glad you brought up meditation, because meditation is something I've been, the past like few weeks, like reading more about and watching videos, because as something like I want to start incorporating just in like my daily schedule at some point. What are some tips in like getting started and like that becoming like part of your lifestyle?
Mm-hmm. I Meditation was hard for me as well, because I'm very scatterbrained and it's very easy for me to be all over the place. But what helped me is I use this app called Calm. That's where I started. And it really helps you to practice meditation to where you may not need an app. You may be able to sit in your room one day with no music or music and do it all by yourself. But it helps you kind of just focus on, just staying present. That's the most important, because I have a huge problem of living in the future. That's why I have anxiety. And, just using apps like that, or even starting off with focusing on a sound or a specific object in the room that you're sitting in or wherever you are, and just focusing on it for as long as you can. And I would even keep track of how long you're focusing on something before your mind starts to wander. And then as you do it every day or every other day, you can figure out, okay, I can pick up a pattern. Like, where am I really losing track? Like, what's on my mind the most, And I also think it's important to figure out, are you a morning person, an evening person, a night person? When do you feel the most at ease is when you should meditate, especially when you're just starting out.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the staying in the moment thing. I think that for a musician, or maybe it's just me, but I feel like when I'm performing, sometimes it's hard to stay in the moment. You know, my mind starts to wonder if I'm playing something, and like the challenge for me, and this part of the reason why I'm like want to get into meditation, just get better at, focusing, is that like a lot of times when I'm performing, you get scatterbrained. You're thinking about, oh, you see like someone in the crowd just moved a certain way, and then you're out of it. Or like I'm thinking about, there's this musical passage that's coming up that I've been like shedding for weeks and weeks, and I'm like nervous about it or whatever. And like staying in the moment, I think is so important, because I said in our last episode that to me, like what helps anxiety, at least when I feel like I'm being successful at it, dealing with it, is when, I'm able to not get super focused on like this one little thing in the music versus like thinking about the music as a whole.
Mhm.
So to me, that's where my lack of like focus comes into. I like to be either I get distracted by something either in the crowd or what have you, or I get super focused on like this one little note or passage or this technical thing that I'm playing, and then I just like I kind of lose it, or I get really choked up, really tight.
Mhm.
And so for me, that's just kind of like why I want to get into meditation, because I need to work on just calming the mind and staying in the moment. And I think like regardless if you're a musician or not, I think we live in a day and age where there's so many distractions. There's social media, there's TV, there's a million channels. Now there's, you got your Netflix, you got your Hulu, YouTube, all these things, and we're constantly being fed like information 24 hours. So like for me, it's about like trying to calm my mind and being
Mhm.
able to focus on one like singular thing for a certain amount of time, and just
Mhm.
get better clarity and better balance in my life.
There you go.
uh, yeah.
You're already on it. You're
I,
already,
I'm on it, right?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Tyler, we've had some conversations about stuff like this. I know you've done some stuff like this, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I try to do is it's like the mindset of winning the morning. Because if I can win the morning, the rest of the day tends to follow suit. So right now, like I experiment with different things to see like what works and what doesn't. And so like the morning, I like to get up before my wife gets up because it's like there's quiet, there's no obligations. So yeah, exactly. So for me, I've been trying to start with like reading the Bible and just like getting into like a spiritual mindset and reading truth. Like for me, like what I believe is truth. And so then it's like you're reading these things, these are the first thoughts that you're reading and believing, as opposed to like scrolling on Facebook or Instagram and like now you're reading other people's opinions or things and it's like those fill your mind as opposed to like, you know, reading something that you believe is deep truth. So that's where I've kind of been doing now. And then I've also been getting into the Wim Hof breathing method, and I've been doing his app. And so that just within itself is a challenge because, it's like you breathing in, breathing out a lot of times, and then, you hold your breath for as long as you can. And I try to do 3 to 4 sets of that. And that kind of varies of when I do that throughout the day. But like I did that before this podcast because I ran a few errands this morning and I was like, okay, I want to do this because you literally lie on the ground and just kind of like, there's music and it's very meditative type of state. It's very nice. But
Mhm.
doing that and then also exercising, I'm a big long distance runner. So I try to exercise every day just because that also works on staying in the present moment.
Mhm.
And I find that I'm best mentally, like I have an edge mentally when I'm in my fittest shape. So like when I'm preparing for a marathon, preparing for like a big race, mentally I'm always on point because typically in that time I also cut out like my diet's super clean and then I also cut out alcohol just because I like to cut out any distractions. And so I notice like mentally I have this edge where you feel like whatever comes at you, you can defeat. And so like, it's really hard because I'm obviously not racing now, but to keep that going, because I run year round. So to keep that going year round is difficult. But like you said, Javian, like staying in the present moment, like anytime you do something difficult, especially something that involves your body, like that forces you to have to stay present and focus in on the task. And I think that can also transfer over to what you do musically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know that you work out, you lift and you run. And so it's like, if you start running, you're like, oh God, this sucks. And you're just like thinking about like, oh, I can't wait to get home and this and that, as opposed to like, all right, well, I told myself I'm going to be out here for X amount of time or X amount of mileage. Like I might as well like invest in this and then it'll be over. So I feel like those things have kind of been really like strong disciplines in my life that have like allowed me to deal with this. Again, I mean, I still deal with performance anxiety. And I think, Meagan, like what you said is like caring too much about what other people think. Like I've realized like that's like a big deal for me. And then it's like, why do I care about those things? And it's like, you want them to accept you. You want them to like, feel like you provide value. And so like, I'm wondering like, where did that stem from? Like, where does that come from? You know, it's weird. I mean, you start digging deep and you start looking at yourself in the mirror and you're like, man, like who is this person?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll be surprised at how many things, whether they were extremely harmful or not, that happened when you were a kid. It all comes from when you were a kid. Was there ever a time, where you felt like you did a great job and someone was just like, I think you could have done better. Something like that can really help, not help, but make someone have performance anxiety or any type of anxiety when they become an adult, because it's like that constant reminder, oh, I thought I did so well, but this person or these people like always criticize me, so I have to work harder. I have to get their approval. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, and I think like as a teacher, I think that's why I put a lot of value in creating or at least I try to, creating a warm, supportive environment, because I think a toxic environment can also create that feeling of like not being good enough or being so afraid of what people are going to think of you or what they're going to say behind your back. And to me, like there, you know, there is a somewhat of a competitive nature to the music field. Like we have to audition for jobs. It's just the nature of what we do. So in itself, it kind of feeds that, oh, I have to be better than so and so to get that job, or I have to be better than this person to win that competition. So I think, for me, I'm just like, we have to create, as educators, as musicians, like I think it's important to create a supportive environment that, we're all on this journey. Even if, I'm competing against somebody for a job or a competition, at the end of the day, it's my job. I just want to sound good, and I can, do all this work and still be supportive of the person who I'm competing against, And I think that's, applies to not just music, but any field that's, competitive. I think when I watch a lot of sports, and one thing I kind of enjoy seeing is where, you have two teams are battling, like say if it's like a championship game, and then the team that loses, their players will go up to the team who won. It's like, this was like a hard fought game, congratulations, you guys were the better team. But there's no like animosity there, we can both be present in this world or in our field without feeling like I have to be better than that person. Therefore, and I think that will lend us from like feeling that toxic environment of being competitive and the anxiety and the pressure. There's enough pressure, I think, in this world, and I don't think we need to add to it. So I really like try to push of creating a supportive, environment. At least, with my students, I find great value because I've been in situations where it's not like that, and it is not a great environment to be in. I feel like no one benefits from that at all.
Yeah, that's true. Question for you. So positive versus negative self-talk. We addressed this a little bit in the last podcast. So I don't think people realize how much they talk to themselves. It's like a constant thing. But musicians particularly, we tend to over analyze the things that we're playing, like while we're playing them, and then we beat ourselves up a lot in our heads. So what are ways that musicians and people just in general, whoever's listening, can work on creating more of a positive self-talk atmosphere within themselves, and also identifying these negative self-talk trends that they might have about themselves?
Yeah, I mean, positive self-talk, I like to tell people all the time that there's a difference between positive self-talk and like toxic positive self-talk. And what I mean by that is like, if you are feeling something that is really weighing you down, you have to let yourself feel it. Because if you say, oh, it's going to be okay, it's fine, don't worry about it, you're not helping yourself. It's just going to come back later, and you would hate for that feeling to come back when you're center stage and you're trying to, do the best that you can. So it's really, it's very, it's very simple. It's kind of just like, you have to tell yourself, like, I have been practicing this instrument for this amount of time. I'm good at this. I know I'm good at this, unless or I wouldn't be in the position I am right now. That's positive self-talk, being realistic, not getting caught up in like wishful thinking or, unrealistic expectations. And then the negative self-talk is pretty self-explanatory, where you're just like, even though you practiced for 3 hours last night, you're just like, oh, I suck. This is going to be horrible. As if you've never put in hours, days, years of work into your craft. Like, that's just ridiculous, And you have to tell yourself, that's ridiculous. Every single time those thoughts come up, you're like, no, I don't have time for that today. I know that I'm good at this, and move forward with that.
So, yeah, I completely agree. She nailed it.
That's it. That's the sauce.
That is the sauce. That is the sauce. Yeah, I think that is so true. Just thinking about like when I'm performing, and you start talking, and all these thoughts are running through your head, and trying to calm the voice, slow the voice down to like complete silence is so hard. And it's really hard to do like in the moment of a performance. Like right before you go on stage, it's a little kind of easier to kind of find your center and kind of eliminate that. But like once you're in that moment and it starts to creep back into like while you're playing, and it's so hard. And I think a lot of that is because when we're practicing, we are being, we're analyzing what we're doing so we can do it better the next time. And then once we go to a performance, it's hard to take that out of the performance because we've so ingrained in like being critical. I mean, granted, we have to as part of what we do, but we're so ingrained in just constantly talking and listening and analyzing what we're doing. So like when we get to the performance, it's hard to turn that off, right? So it's kind of like, that's why I think like practicing performing is so important, right? It's not, sure, you want to shed and work through like the fine things of the piece or whatever you're working on, but then there's like the practicing the performance, putting yourself in a performance space. Like this is the recital, or this is the competition. This is how this goes. And I need to put myself in that space enough times that I'm able to kind of turn that voice off in the back of my head, and I can just be in the moment, and practice doing everything that leads up to the performance, meaning like the meditation before you perform. I like to have my students even like put on like dress clothes to kind of recreate the feeling of the performance as if, you're going to dress the day of the performance, or like playing for friends to recreate that pressure of like, I'm doing this performance for colleagues who are going to be listening to me, And I think that's also really important, recreating the performance situation so we can practice turning off that negative voice after practicing with it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Turn off the negative voice. I like that.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So what would you say to somebody that deals with comparing themselves to others? And particularly in our field, it's always like he or she does this better than me, performing wise or playing wise, or this person has this job and I'm not doing this, or these people are off to this grad school with this big name. And I mean, comparison is like, I mean, it's widespread anywhere, but particularly with musicians, we're just always constantly like listening and judging what people are playing and how they play. So like, how can we, what do you say to somebody that's struggling with that and finds like they view themselves as being less valuable because they don't have certain things that this other person has?
Mhm. I tell my patients all the time because I actually meet a lot of people who are dealing with that comparison, and I tell them, it's kind of like backtracking to what we were saying before. Is like, says who told me that this person is better than me? Who told me that me and this person aren't equally talented? This person might be better than me in this situation, and I might be better in this situation, but all in all, we're all talented here, you know? So just kind of bringing them back to what they bring to the table and understanding that what they bring to the table is amazing is what helps people not compare themselves anymore. Because I mean, we all know there's people that are prettier than us out here, smarter, talented, can learned math in their sleep, and some of
Yeah.
us just weren't as lucky. And it's really just getting to the point where comparison is really the stealer of joy. If you spend your whole life comparing yourself to other people, you're never even going to feel good enough for yourself, even if nobody is criticizing you. You're always going to nitpick and find things that are wrong with you that you can do better, when really you're doing the best that you can. And there's always room for growth, but comparing yourself to others, I mean, it's not really gonna help you in the long run when especially when you've elevated in life and you've gotten to higher places, you've gotten into schools, and you're kind of just like, why am I comparing myself again? I clearly can do something right because I'm here. So it's just it's constantly reminding yourself of like, okay, why am I feeling this way today? Where is this coming from? And how can I fix it? Because I already know that if I continue to criticize myself or compare myself to others, I already know the consequences of that. And I don't want to deal with those consequences anymore. I want to go in a different direction to where I can be at peace with my craft, my talent, and also acknowledge that there's other people who are just as talented or even more talented, and that's okay.
Well said.
I like that.
Yeah.
Comparison is the killer of joy.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna frame that in my office.
I know, right? That's good. That's really good.
But it's so true. Just to share a quick story, I had a student a while back who asked me how did I think he compared to other uh, juniors his age around based on places I've been or have heard. I was like, well, first of all, there's no need to compare. You have a lot of talent. We all have things that we need to work on. I have things I work on every day that I want to get better at, and it's not about like comparing you to somebody else. It's not about that. It's about just figuring out how can we get a little bit better each and every day, and then we'll figure it out from there. We all, like I said, we're all on. We're all. I think it was Barbara Butler who said something like she's a trumpet professor at Rice University, one of the big name trumpet professors in the entire country, and like she talks about like we're all on this singular journey. We're just at different points along the way, and we're all on the same. And I like to use that because it's like we're all the same here. We're all just trying to figure it out. I might be a little further than you in one aspect, but there's some things that you might be further than me on certain things. So so I agree with you said like comparison, like it's a joy killer. So I think that's really important to like make a note of comparison, and it's so prevalent in the music field. Like I see it every day, every week. So really really important stuff there. So Meagan, I know you have a mental health, is it a vlog, like a channel?
It's my Instagram page.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So could you maybe, I know you talk a lot about like mental health. Can you like tell us a little bit about your sorry, your Instagram channel?
Yeah, it's actually called Mindful Checkup. And what I do is I just talk about like a plethora of mental health topics. I do like self care vlogs that I'm adding soon. And I also just started meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of gives people a place to come to kind of be more educated about mental health. Because I think that there is a huge like lack of it in like a lot of communities and or people just don't have access to it. So it's really just an open platform for those topics and just introducing people to meditation specifically because not everyone can afford to go get a therapist.
Yeah.
And if you can be a self healer, the holistic psychologist taught me this. She's also on Instagram. If you can be a self healer, there's so many things that you would be amazed that you can heal from all by yourself without needing external help, from a therapist, a psychiatrist, anything like that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what inspired me to make the page, just to give people a place to come to when they just want to learn more or just learn how to meditate or, any of those things.
Yeah, I think like one of the beauties that at least I've seen over the past maybe 3 to 5 years is like the mental health awareness has really increased over the past few years. Like when I was an undergrad, no one ever talked about like mental health really, and that wasn't that long ago. I mean, maybe like 10 years ago, which that sounds crazy right now. Sorry, but I mean, again, that wasn't that long ago, and it just wasn't like something people normally talked about. But now, like even within the university that I work with, there's this constant push for like mental health awareness and physical health and just promoting those two things. I think now people are really starting to have this conversation about like how important it is to help heal the mind and heal the body, and how important those two things are and how they relate to how successful a student is, for instance, in a university or a college is so important. So many students burn out, they get stressed out by the environment, or worse. I mean, I'm seeing worse situations than that. So I mean, I think that's beautiful, and we'll definitely tag your Instagram page to this, so people can certainly find you. But yeah, it's mental health is so important, and it's a conversation I have with my students about mental health all the time. Um, so kudos to your work on that. Tyler,
Yeah.
did you have anything?
Yeah. So, say somebody is kind of looking at their situation and saying, like, okay, I need to work on myself and I need to, deal with some things in the past. Like, how do they get started? How do they get on the journey? You said, what if you don't have enough money to go see a therapist? What are some resources that people can latch onto and kind of start heading in that direction? I mean, you mentioned an app as well. Could you just kind of describe, like, say you're a student that doesn't have the funds to go see a therapist, or maybe vice versa, you have somebody that their work will cover those costs. Like, how do they take those first steps and also feel okay knowing that, like, it's a step in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, even if you don't, if a student doesn't have a lot of money to get a therapist, I always tell people to go on psychologytoday.com. And what you can do is you can filter by insurance, by income, by no income, and it'll tell you what therapists are in your area that specialize in anxiety, depression, trauma, and you can actually start there. And even when you contact those therapists, let's say they're not taking any patients right now, they can then connect you to people that they know who are taking patients on a sliding scale. And a sliding scale is when you can see a therapist based off of your income, or, they may only charge you like one price, per month for a certain amount of sessions. So, really good therapists want to work with people who don't have the means to see them for full price. So I just always tell people to start with Psychology Today. And then also, if you just can't find anyone in your area on the website, it's always good to look up support groups, because support groups are always free, kind of like AA or NA. And there's so many groups for different addictions, traumas, different styles of therapy. If you only want to be in a group of women or men, whatever, there's just so many resources in the community if you simply just reach out to a therapist or a psychiatrist, or even go see your doctor, or community mental health, where services are free or they're provided to people who only have like Medicaid or Medicare. It's kind of just being able to make that first step in reaching out and asking for help. And then I have found that we have so many connections that we just kind of help each other as therapists, where we're like, oh, I have a patient that, can only afford this and you specialize in this. And, you just send them in those directions. So that's where I would start for someone who either has insurance that's covered by their job or someone who doesn't have insurance. You can always start at psychologytoday.com.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, I didn't know that. I'm glad you said that. I had no
idea. I had no idea that existed. And the other thing too is, it almost, like, a lot of times people view doctors or, in those kind of fields as like they're just trying to take your money. And it's like, hearing you speak about this, you're like, no, actually these professionals care about you and are willing to help you out. I think there's, they've gotten like a bad stigma, and so it's really refreshing for me to hear that, like, no, like, they're going to talk to their other professionals, their other colleagues, to try to make something work. That's really refreshing to hear.
Absolutely. And also there's another resource called Talkspace. It's an app and it takes insurance. And I also think it has a sliding scale. I see my therapist through Talkspace. You can either text your therapist if you're more comfortable with texting, or you can still do like video chat, like kind of like Zoom like this, for 45 to 50 minutes. And I absolutely love that app because it's for people who really don't have time to see somebody in person. And then with COVID making it really difficult to see people in person, that's also another option that people have. So it's called Talkspace.
Talkspace. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Meagan, I want to thank you so much again for, allowing us to talk to you about, an issue that we both find very, very important to our field and to, everyone, even, any field for that matter. So we kind of like to wrap up on a lighter side of things. Is, what are you listening to music wise? Like, what are you listening to? What are you jamming to right now?
I am obsessed with a Swedish singer named Leon. I listen to her every day. I remember when she first stepped on the scene, I think it was like in 2015. I found her on YouTube, which is how I found a lot of the artists I listen to, because I'm more of like I find that I listen to a lot of artists who are from the UK or Scandinavian countries or just not in the US. So she is my absolute favorite right now. She just has a very distinct voice, like Amy Winehouse. I just really love when someone just doesn't sound like anybody else. Like, that's what attracts me to them. So she's like at the top of my list right now.
Awesome. All right. Well, I gotta go check it out. You gotta check it out. Tyler, what are you listening to right now?
So outside of like trumpet world, Corey Asbury, he is a singer songwriter, more on like the worship side of things. But like his songwriting is like very unique, very good, very storytelling, and it's cool. Like, he'll write songs that he'll like write for his wife or for his son, and it's like you hear the words and you're like, oh my gosh, that is like super deep. So he's just like a great musician. And then from a trumpet standpoint, I don't know if you've checked this out, but Jim Wilt, right, associate principal of LA, he's been posting YouTube videos like every single day of him just playing an etude down, like, since COVID happened.
Oh, really?
And yeah, so I subscribe to his YouTube channel, and every day he's like plugging out another etude, and he sounds fantastic.
Right.
So yeah, check that out. It's really cool. What about you, man?
So since we're back in kind of the school system going on the past 2 weeks, I recently re-listened to on the trumpet side, the Center City Brass Quintet, their first album, which is self-titled album. The late Ryan Anthony is playing in that group, and so I was listening to it because I was trying to find some pieces for my groups to play, and I was just listening to the album. It's so so incredible. Of just like the cohesiveness of that group and just like the sound they're able to create is incredible. I mean, I listened to it for the first time back, I think when I was in high school. And so I haven't listened to it in years, and I just re-listened to it. I'm just like, holy crap, this is like so good. And then like on the other side of things, I've just been kind of listening to a lot of different artists that I really like. I was listening to Gretchen Parlato yesterday. She had an album some years ago. I think it was called Butterfly, I think, or at least one of the tunes on her album is called Butterfly. I think it's called Butterfly. But I came across one of her videos on YouTube of her basically doing tunes from that album with a full big band orchestration, and it adds so much to the song. So if you guys YouTube Gretchen Parlato with like the big band is incredible. It's like so good. I mean, she has a very unique sounding voice already, and like I respect musicians who are like, I can tell they're a student of their craft. She's like also an ethnomusicologist. So like she's a really like educated musician as well as a great, jazz musician. So definitely check her out. If you don't know who Gretchen Parlato is, I believe she's based out in LA, but she might be in New York City now. So that's kind of who I've been listening to. So good stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Meagan, where can people find you on the social medias?
They can find me on Instagram at Mindful Checkup. That's where I'm at. And I've got lots of things. I've only been doing it since like March, so I'm like adding content as I go, but like it's been really fun just, doing what I love outside of work, and it's kind of like my own thing. So I don't have to follow like a specific rule or, specific kind of therapy. I can kind of do it all. So that's where you guys can find me.
Awesome.
Cool.
Tyler, where can we find you?
Instagram, Tyler Duncan 91, and then Facebook, Tyler Duncan. What about you?
You find me Instagram at Nerdy Prof and Facebook just my name Javian. So that's where I'll be. Again, before we wrap, I want to thank Meagan again for her time and give her many words of wisdom today.
Yes, fantastic.
And even though she didn't drink any coffee, thank you for, having a cup with us, a cup of water. it's all great. But thank you guys for listening to part 2 on our series on performance anxiety. And we hope to see you and, share more topics with you as the weeks progress. So cool. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Thank you
guys.
All
right. Bye.
Bye.